Welcome back to the Thinking Critical Comic Book Podcast. We're live right here on YouTube. This will be simulcast on the podcast itself. And we're going to be talking about mentorship in comics. I've got a couple of writers who don't realize that they're mentors. We're going to get into it. Aaron Sparrow is like, I'm not a mentor. So trust me, Aaron, there are many professionals in the comic book industry that look for you for guidance. They go to you for knowledge and the sharing of information because you, in fact, are their mentor. They just forgot to tell you. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, I was thinking of it in a very narrow kind of sense, I guess. I was like, yeah, mentor. I don't have like an understudy or anything like that. But I guess, being an editor, you are mentoring people and you're helping them with their scripts and whatnot. So I guess
absolutely. And those same people still reach out to you for information, right?
That is true.
Because they still look at you, look to you as their mentor.
Oh man, I don't want to be anybody's peer.
you're not a peer. You're a mentor. It means you're above them.
You're
the one that's providing the feedback and stuff. Also with us today is the man behind, one of the men behind Common X, Black Ops, Common America, Black Ops. You've done well over $100,000 on multiple crowdfunding projects now, Mark Pellegrini. I hate to break it to you, but people look to you for guidance and they reach out to you for feedback, not just because they think you're a smart guy, because they want you to be their mentor and show them how you were so successful so they can do that themselves. Did you know that,
well,
Mark?
They're in a lot of trouble because I have no idea what I'm doing.
They forgot to. They should have messaged Tim.
Yeah, right.
And we've already got Darth Bobcat calling dibs on Aaron Sparrow as his mentor. Sounds like fun.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And here in YouTube land, when I decided I was going to create a channel, obviously I knew, generally speaking, what I wanted to do. I reached out to a couple of people informally that I had talked to in the past. One specifically came back to me with the concrete information. His name was Doug Ernst. We're friends, but I still consider him more of a mentor because he's helped me out so much creating the channel and helped me get here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, awesome. Doug has 3 times as many followers as I do, so he's got a wider reach. He's been a professional writer for over 10 years, or longer than that. So yeah, he's full of great advice. Actually, when I just started writing my first scripts, I always passed them through him for his advice.
Absolutely. That's a mentor-mentee relationship. Now, let's get into the intro to mentorship. There's a couple of very good quotes I want to talk about. One of them was from a mentor's perspective, the other from the mentee's perspective. We're going to look at both of them while we're doing this today. Our chief want in life is somebody who will make us do what we can, from Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm sure you've been there, Aaron, where you're like, I need somebody to let me know that I could do this and to keep pushing me forward so I can actually get this project done or do it to my utmost ability.
That is true, and I have had precious little few people fall into that category, so I've had to do it myself. But the benefit of that is I've already made, I think, all of the mistakes. So when I do tell people, how to approach different things, I come with the benefit of, listen, I've already made all these mistakes, so let me tell you what to avoid, which is pretty much as valuable as the things that you should do.
Very valuable information. We've got Steven Spielberg. The delicate balance of mentoring someone is not creating them in your own image, but giving them the opportunity to create themselves. So when somebody reaches out for you for help, you're not trying to recreate Common America through them. You just want to help them along to find their voice.
Exactly. So I know we're going to have a separate episode on editing, so I don't want to traipse into that topic too much. But my attitude about editing is very similar to my attitude about what I suppose is mentorship, because I never thought of it that way. Is that I don't when someone asks me to do some editing for them, to review their script and give them notes, I don't take the red pen. I don't rewrite their dialogue or their scripts like the way I would write it. My goal isn't to make them write more like me. My goal is to make them the best version of themselves as a writer, just to let them know the general errors that they could be making, or give them examples or ideas of directions they could go in, but not to rewrite it for them the way I would have written it, because I don't want to read everything, that as from my lens. I want to be surprised by the way other people would write.
Absolutely. And one of the mistakes I think that Aaron and Mark kind of had coming into this is they think of mentorship as like this really formal process. Like it's part of the formal process. It's an informal arrangement or relationship that two people have. It's normally developed over time. You hope that it develops naturally. You don't want to just go up to Aaron Sparrow if you've never met him, be like, I'd like for you to be my mentor. It's like Aaron doesn't know if he even likes you yet. You gotta let the person decide that they want to be your mentor. And so I do think there is confusion about whether it's a formal process. What are you saying, Aaron?
I often just tell them that, very well, I shall be your mentor. You shall be my squire. You shall earn your keep.
Grab my supplies. We're going to the store, kind of thing. So let's get into, I think we've done an intro. This is kind of what the conversation is going to be about. What is a mentor? In the dictionary, it is defined as an experienced and trusted advisor. But a mentor is really someone that you can develop a long-term relationship. These are likely long-lasting relationships, like the relationships Aaron still has with the creators he worked with at Boom Studios that still reach out to him. Longer-lasting relationships that is centered around the professional or personal growth and development of the individual. Mentors do not work on a day-to-day basis to help make decisions, as Mark himself was just saying. They're just there to offer support, wisdom, and teaching over time. And they're normally, you have different type of mentors. Your experienced leaders, someone with a higher status and seniority. Maybe if you wanted to be the world's greatest horror writer, you would strive for Stephen King to be your mentor. He's somebody with a lot of status in that community. You could also have a coach. I would consider Aaron more of a coach who's helped set and achieve personal goals. You could have an educator, maybe someone that's a formal educator that you've taken on as a mentorship. Maybe not, they don't have all the experience, but they do have the baseline knowledge. Self-help, which would be more like books, articles, websites. A trusted listener, that's what I'm good at. I'm good with listening, not with advice. And there's also peer mentorship where you have Mark here and Aaron. They might get together and talk about things every once in a while because they respect each other's work within the comic books. So that's what kind of mentorship is to you. Aaron, during your experience, what kind of mentors have helped you the most? Has it been the experienced leader, a coach, educator, a trusted listener, peer, or even self-help?
I will tell you that in most of my career, within the comic book industry, I've kind of been thrown to the wolves. Now, I had a really strong foundation. I started out at Tokyo Pop during the first big manga boom that was going on in the country. And there were a lot of really smart, really experienced editors there. Two of the people that I really learned a lot from were Mark Paniccia, who is now over at Marvel and oversees the Star Wars books. I feel bad for him because I'm sure there's a lot of control coming from Lucasfilm as to how those books are produced and what talent he uses and things like that. That's purely my supposition. I haven't asked him about it. But Mark is a really experienced, really smart editor. He knows so much about story, and so I learned a lot from him. The other person that I learned from was Rob Tokar, who had also been at Marvel. I've told some stories about him and the Web Armor Spider-Man saga in the past on the show. But I learned a lot from him as well. So and he was delightful to work for because you would go in and one day I'm holding a bunch of papers and he comes walking in and he's got a biscotti in his mouth because he's carrying a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, "Good morning, Rob." And he turns to me and puts his stuff on his desk and takes the biscotti out of his mouth and points it at me and says, "Damn it, Sparrow! I don't pay you to stand around gawking. I pay you to get me pictures of Spider-Man." And I was working for this guy. So I started out really strong. When I got to Boom, I was basically thrown to the wolves and left to my own devices because there wasn't anybody in a position there that I could learn from. I came in with more experience than the managing editor. So it was a really interesting time.
Yeah, so you were thrown to the wolves, became the mentor, and you established these relationships. We do have Darth Bobcat, who wants to be your mentee, Aaron Sparrow. He says, "Don't just ask to be the mentee. Don't." He's already screwed it up. Aaron, you're my mentor. Why didn't you warn me? Well,
I told you, I'm making it up as I go. My mentorship is the Indiana Jones program.
Absolutely. Mentorship normally is a very unofficial program. I will get into some experiences within my career in the military where it was they were more formal and stuff. But I know, Mark, you grew up and there was a comic shop, and the comic shop owner wrote comic books. He was a published author, and you still have a relationship with Michael Tierney to this day. Yes.
So a lot of I've never had a mentor, and a lot of what I've learned writing comics, I kind of just learned through personal trial and error, which isn't always the best way. And a lot of times it's much more efficient to ask people who've gone through the experience before you for their advice, and that'll keep you from making the same mistakes they did. Sometimes it just can't be helped. Sometimes you just got to, fall down and scrape your knee on your own to learn the lesson the hard way. But I have had several people who've had decades of experience ahead of me who have given me a lot of advice just through informal chit chat, just talking back and forth, like Michael Tierney, who published comics back in the 80s and 90s. He has great stories about dealing with people like Eric Larson, dealing with other artists. He's a writer, so a lot of his perspective that he was able to give me from the writer's perspective on situations where, well, what do you do when you're dealing with an artist in this scenario of this personality type. And I haven't had too many negative experiences working with artists, but he was able to give me advice on if you ever do fall into that situation. Another excellent writer and editor who I've talked with a lot is Roland Mann. He was the editor at Malibu Comics back in the 90s. And so he has a lot of industry experience, both good and bad, high times and low times. He's able to give me a lot of great advice. We've had him on the Bunderdome a couple of times, and we've met him at several conventions. Roland's a great source of just, and again, like this isn't like, whenever I think of a mentor, I told you before, I think of like the blacksmith and his assistant who stands there and learns all the tricks of the trade.
Arrangement.
I know that's not what it is. Like
when it comes to
yeah, when it comes to mentorship, it can be something as casual as just meeting them at a convention or at your comic book shop and just talking. Shooting the shit back and forth and getting advice. And sometimes the advice that you get isn't even formal advice. They tell you a story of their experience, and then you extrapolate the knowledge from that story, like an Aesop's fable kind of thing. You figure it out on your own. And most of my experiences with professional writers and creators has been in that fashion.
Yeah, and a lot of it is actually encouragement. Listen, I know this one didn't work, or this isn't quite what you were looking for, but you're getting better. These opportunities are coming up, so people can stay motivated. I know AL, who might be in the chats today, I'm not really sure, normally is in here. They were talking about motivation. A mentor will help keep you motivated. We do have Lane Kramer. So would someone be able to mentor Chris Cantwell on the meeting of the American Dream, since his Captain America looks like he could use some?
Oh,
Mark, are you up for it? Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron, it's you?
Look, who's got the Captain America avatar?
Oh, I'm bad.
I would school the hell out of Christopher Cantwell on how to write Captain America. Yeah, the problem is that there's no editor at the wheel. You look at the credits, and it's Alana Smith, and I don't know who it is that's above her as far as the editorial hierarchy goes. But she's not giving Christopher Cantwell any notes. He's written for TV. What has she done? She's been an assistant editor at Marvel.
She can't be his mentor because she's already lower on the totem pole and doesn't have the experience that he actually has.
Yeah, and the problem is, like with a lot of writers, like you say, let's say like a Brian Michael Bendis. We've never talked about him before. He comes in with so much clout already that if an editor resists him and tells him, "Hey, this story is terrible. Hey, this dialogue is stupid. What are you doing? You're phoning this in. I need you to rewrite this." He's going to go to the higher ups and he's going to complain because he makes way more money than that editor, and his contract is probably pretty solid. He's going to go and complain. That editor is going to get fired, and he's going to be able to continue to do what he wants. So that's a huge problem.
See, Brian Michael Bendis is a great example of someone who understands the benefits of mentorship to his benefit as well as to the mentee, because he has established a lot of mentorships across the industry, and that's why he's always getting hired. Everyone talks and holds Brian Michael Bendis in extremely high esteem because he's mentored so many creators that have been very successful after that relationship that people still look to him for that kind of guidance. He's used it very smartly. Another one is, oh my goodness, who was I thinking of? I lost it. I'm sorry, Mark.
I'll name a mentor, someone who's responsible
Warren
for a lot.
Ellis. That was the other one I meant.
A lot of people Warren Ellis, because that's what I was going to say.
Yes.
He has cultivated a huge amount of writers, and it didn't stop them from bringing out the long knives the moment that he had a piece of controversy to save their own skin. So,
you hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, you hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But
I feel like the celebrity writer is almost like a breed unto themselves. Like that doesn't apply to most human beings. It's like we talk about Bendis a lot, but another great example of a celebrity writer who the editors just had no control over their bad ideas is Kevin Smith and Batman: The Widening Gyre, where there was no editor on the totem pole big enough to tell a Hollywood celebrity writer like Kevin Smith that a scene where Batman pees his pants might be a bad idea. And so Kevin Smith, his defense of that scene is like, well, we had editors on that book and not a single one of them told me it was a bad idea, so there must be nothing wrong with it. No, they didn't tell you it was a bad idea because you're a Hollywood celebrity who gets paid $1 million to write this script, and you're going to go and you're going to piss and moan at the publishers if an editor tells you to cut the scene or to alter the scene where Batman pees his pants. So I mean, they're almost like you got to set them aside for this topic.
Kevin Smith needed a mentor that could tell him this is a bad idea.
Exactly.
That's another benefit of mentorship. Let's get into this. I got some official stuff to write here. A mentor, the benefits are that a mentor provides writers, artists, editors, etc., within the comic book industry professionals with opportunities to develop and become more competent in their craft and prepare for growth opportunities in the future. Benefits go both ways. For the mentee, the person being mentored, you get knowledge shared to you. You get honest, critical feedback. That's likely what you were saying there with Kevin Smith never received. You get expand your professional networks. You get your development encouraged. People get to tell you what you're doing, how you can do things better. Keep your motivation up. You get a trusted advisor. You get to learn from past experiences, which is gold right there. And for the most part, it's free. That's another big benefit. A benefit of the relationship for the mentor. You get to improve your leadership and communication skills, which is very important. If you want a job like what Aaron Sparrow had, where you were the lead editor for an entire line of comic books, you're going to need to be a leader, and you need to be able to communicate with people. You'll be able to reinforce knowledge and remember some of the stuff that you've done, which is important. Expand professional networks, because sometimes the mentee is going to know people that you didn't even know and witness the success of that person. So there are a lot of benefits to a mentorship, Aaron. I'm sure that you've worked with many people. Specifically, we'll go to your time on Boom Kids, where you started out, maybe it was their first job, or maybe you didn't have that confidence in what they were doing, but you've kept in touch with them and you've seen them grow and get a lot of professional success over time.
Absolutely. It's really interesting because I had an open submissions policy. So basically, if you ran into me at a convention, or you found my email and you contacted me and said, hey, I'd really like to write this character, I didn't really care too much how much professional experience you had. I cared whether or not you could do the job. So I'd say, well, send me some samples and send me your pitch. And then if I liked the pitch and I thought it was solid, I would put it through the Pixar. Or if I thought it still needed some work, I would bat it back and I would give them some suggestions to come back for another try. So I met a lot of people who were up and coming in the industry who were just trying to break in, and I really wanted to help those people break in if they had the chops. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and a lot of the people that started out with me have gone on to much greater success, and that was always the goal. I would tell people, I said, I want to make your book so good and make you look so good that eventually I can no longer afford to hire you, and I have to chase you down at a convention and beg you to do a cover for me for old time's sake. That's my goal.
Aaron didn't realize it, but he's a damn good mentor. Is there anyone specific when you see them, you're like, wow, they've grown to heights that I couldn't even imagine, and you get to kind of share in that success and really appreciate where they've gone?
Yeah, a couple of people that I worked with. It's a totally different thing that she's doing. But I had Grace Randolph as one of my writers when I was at Boom Kids, and it wasn't the best experience for either of us. Not because of anything with Grace or even I think anything with me, but we were just kind of in a very odd political position with Boom, and then with the Muppet Studio, which is the books that she was working on. So the Muppet the Muppet books that she did weren't, I think, to what she would have liked them to be, and a lot of that was because of interference from the person that was in charge of approvals at the time. But we tried to get her on other Pixar books and things like that. But by the time we got anything going, I was already out the door at Boom. So, but yeah, Grace Randolph's gone on to great success on YouTube. It's huge now. And then as far as artists go, I worked with an artist at Ape Entertainment, Marcelo Ferreira. He worked for me there, and then we hired him to do a Mythic Legions book for the action figure line for the Four Horsemen that he knocked out of the park, and he's on Amazing Spider-Man now, so he's done really well for himself. Marcio Takara as well started out with me on Incredibles. I fought to get him on. He wanted to do like a mainline superhero book, and I kept getting told that he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready. Just keep him on Incredibles. He's not ready for the big leagues. That's what they considered the Boom Studios titles over the Disney titles, was the big leagues. And I finally, I kept pushing for him, and then finally they got into a desperate situation, and they put him on Incorruptible, I think it was, and he knocked that out of the park, and now he's a big artist for DC, and he does all kinds of stuff. So yeah, a lot of people who started out with me have gone on to great heights, and I'm really proud of them.
It always feels great though, doesn't it? I remember when I was putting up my first Airman up for like PatCom, like Airman of the Year, literally competing with like tens of thousands of people, and he actually won. Obviously it wasn't my way, but I kind of felt like it was, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, you helped out. You were a piece of that person's story, and that's really gratifying. You don't have to be the hero. You can be the man behind the curtain. That's fine.
Absolutely. And Mark, I know, obviously being a writer can be very difficult. You actually have a full-time vocation, and you're kind of doing your writing on the side. You're doing your comic books, you're doing novels and everything. I imagine every once in a while you can lose your motivation.
So the important thing is to keep your motivation, is to maintain your momentum. If I ever go for a long period where I'm not writing, then I get lethargic. It's almost like when you take like a week off from going to the gym, then the next week comes and like, oh, I just don't feel like going to the gym, and then that's how you fall out of you fall off the wagon. So my system is that whenever I have a stretch of time between comic scripts that I'm writing with Tim, like I'm waiting on him to give me his revisions or whatever, that's when I'll work on a prose story or a short story or a chapter in a book I'm writing or something. So just that I'm always writing, and I never fall out of that momentum, because once I lose that speed, then that's when it's harder to get started going again.
Nobody helps you out keep your motivation?
I know what helps me keep my motivation, honestly, is all the positive feedback. I love doing these streams with you guys. People see me on Twitter all the time just because I like chatting with people. I like talking about books. I love it when we have one of our comics like Black Ops or Common America up in crowdfunding. Not just because that's when we're earning money to crowdsource it, but it's also because we're able to motivate conversation about it, and that's always a boost when you get to talk with people about the things that you're working on. That just makes you feel very motivated and very gleeful.
And you were talking earlier, you have a relationship with Doug Ernst like I have. Obviously, mine's over YouTube. Yours is more of a writing relationship. But, you obviously still send your initial drafts to him for a reason, because he gives you really honest, critical feedback that helps you improve your story.
Well, Doug's been a writer professionally longer than I have, because he writes for the New York Times. He writes one of those? Washington Times, I think it's Washington. He's a newspaper writer, so he's a journalist, and he's been writing for a long time. But that's a different discipline from writing comics, writing narrative fiction. But when I was working on some of my earliest scripts, I sent those to him, and he gave me his feedback. And when he does his Soul Finder scripts, he sends those to me for my initial notes. He has a very different style of writing than I do. So my edits are more general. I don't ever try to rewrite any of his stuff for him, and same thing. He never tries to rewrite anything that I write. We just give each other our honest, raw feedback back and forth, and it was very helpful. And Doug, as a writer of fiction now, not just a journalist, he's gone on with Soul Finder to be a huge success. He's working on Soul Finder 3 right now. And Soul Finder 1 and 2, they've been critically acclaimed, and they're selling out constantly on the Iconic Comics website. We can't keep them in stock. So he's already doing huge. But I mean, I knew him before he started publishing Soulfinder, before he started publishing books. Matt Weldon, as an artist, is someone who is already a published artist when we met him. But Tim and I can at least, be can brag that because Matt Weldon is just doing all sorts of stuff now, not just with Soulfinder, but with Punchline and all these other books. But we got him to do a volume of Black Ops for us, Black Ops 2. And so, we kind of got in on the Matt Weldon train before he really took off. So we can always be really proud of that. That there's someone that we knew and that we were able to work back and forth with at the time.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of benefits to being a mentor and being mentee. You're going to get all these mutual benefits with each other and get to enjoy the success. Now let's talk about finding a mentor. So this one can be a little bit daunting. As I mentioned earlier, you don't want to just be like, oh, there's Aaron Sparrow. I always wanted him to be my mentor. You're probably going to want to establish a relationship. Maybe find out if Aaron is as nice in person as he seems to be on YouTube, things of that nature. And one of the trickiest things about mentoring is that it's often informal and that you could make it difficult to find an entry point, as we're talking about here. But these are what the things that you're going to want to look for when you're looking for a mentor. You're going to want to find someone that you can actually connect with. You don't want to be mentored by somebody that you hate or you have nothing in common with or you don't like spending time with informal chats, because that's what most of what mentorship is going to be. You're going to want to find someone with relevant experience. You're definitely going to want to find somebody that are where you want to be. If I want a mentor for my YouTube channel and I say, Aaron Sparrow, he's a really good comic writer. He's got a lot of experience editing. He knows more about comics than I know, especially for the comic book industry. He might not be the right mentor. He has relevant experience in comic books, but maybe not comic book YouTube. And I don't mean to be offensive because I know you have a YouTube channel as well. I'm just using that as an example. You're going to want to find someone with a willingness to share their expertise that will provide honest and direct feedback. You do not want a mentor that's going to tell you everything is great, and that way you can make an ass of yourself when you finally publish your book. And then you want to relationships are going to need to develop organically over time. You can't force the issue when you're finding a mentor. Aaron, how often do people reach out to you and say, you know what, I heard this or this about you, and they start trying to find these informal relationships to where maybe they can get some feedback over time from you?
I'm pretty open. My DMs are open on Twitter, so I do get a lot of people who say like, hey, can you read my script, or can you do this? And I try to do as much as I possibly can with the time that I have. I try to give back to people. So I'll give them some notes, or if I have time, I'll try and read their script and give them some feedback. I do it a little bit differently than Mark has described. I will give you dialogue suggestions, not necessarily for you to use verbatim, but you can if you want to. Like, I leave that open to you when I edit your script. But I will give you like where you have a line, I'll say, here's a couple of other ways that you could do that line, and I'll structure that out. And you can use this if you want, or you can use this as a springboard to rewrite your dialogue. But just I'm trying to give them points to make the dialogue a little more interesting, make it less expository, make it come from the character more. Give more hints as to who the character is through the dialogue. What their attitude is and the way that they approach things. These are all things that I try to lay out for people when I edit their scripts, and they can take it or leave it at that point. It's all just advice based on what I've learned. So I do try to help out whenever I can. So I'm pretty open. If people come to me and they're like, hey, I've got this idea. This is what I'm kind of working with. What do you think of this? I'm happy to I'm happy to give them feedback. The only thing I tell them is if you're writing like a Darkwing Duck fanfic or something else that is a character that I've worked on and may work on in the future, I can't actually look at it because you're tying it. If you touch on something that I was going to do, I don't want to have to abandon it or later put it in the book and then have you go, hey, that guy ripped me off.
And I imagine over time some of those relationships grow and developed where you're friendly and they look to you for sage advice on other things within the industry. Where, hey, do you know somebody over here? I'm looking, I have a pitch, but I don't know an editor over there. Is there any way you can make an introduction, things of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. That happens a lot. And, if I think the person's
a lot easier to do that for people that you connect with and you like, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Yeah. You want to have that connection. And one of the things that you go to comic conventions, and you talk to certain creators, and people will come up and they'll be like, you'll get friendly over the course of a couple days, and then they'll ask you if you want to grab coffee or something like that. And I often do it. I often try to do that and share some advice. I know that there's some people in the industry that are like, oh, these hangers on, and it's like, who the hell are you?
They're bad mentors, Aaron. They're bad mentors.
Yeah, you were well, they're bad people. It's like, you were a hanger on a few years ago. Why don't you want to give something back? What is but these are the kind of people that actively try to destroy other people's careers, behind the scenes when they can. It's just there's some people that are bad mentors and some people that are bad people because they're just petty and vengeful and
yeah. On that subject of bad mentors, one thing that if you are going out and trying to find individuals who can give you advice, and that can just be following them on social media, asking them questions in the chat on a YouTube video, or you go to a comic convention and there's constantly going to be panels of writers who do Q&As or do lectures on comic writing. You have to make it is entirely possible for a mentor or a professional or a lecturer to give you bad advice. I mean, that does happen. I was Googling all this time that Aaron was talking, sorry, but I couldn't find the source of who did it. But it was either like Matt Fraction or Chip Zdarsky or one of the more recent younger writers who did a lecture. And their opening statement was that you as a comic book writer are a fraud. You're illegitimate. And his whole lecture was on how comic book writing, you're a leech. I think he called you that you're basically taking away from the artist, and that writers don't belong. He was filleting artists to a great deal in his lecture, and denigrating the participation of the writer as being illegitimate. And he's a comic book writer, and I feel like he was doing that just to impress a lot of artists, to try to get more artists to work with him. But that's really bad advice if your advice going
maybe
into other writers.
Mentor.
Yeah, it's to tell like, oh, you're a comic book writer. Well, just first thing, you're illegitimate. You're a leech. Writers are the worst thing to happen to comics. You don't belong. And if that's the first thing they're going to tell you before you're going to them for advice, maybe they're not going to give you the best advice. So that you just kind of have to watch out for that. Sometimes they're not even giving you necessarily bad advice. It could just be that the advice doesn't necessarily fit what you're trying to write. Like you want to write a romance story. Maybe you're asking for advice from a horror author, or you want to write a sci-fi story. Why are you asking for advice from a fantasy writer? Sometimes they're not going to give you bad advice. It just might not fit the thing that you're trying to do. And you just have to keep that in mind when you're going to people and asking them for help.
Yeah, also keep
Absolutely.
the difference between advice and philosophy, because those are two very different things that you will get from professionals.
It's crazy. So I know, Mark, you and Tim, you've been working together for quite some time. I think Tim might have done a little bit of crowdfunding work on his own, where he was an artist. Then you guys started working together. I imagine when you first came up with your projects, and I think Black Ops, the first one wasn't crowdfunded. That one went through Antarctic Press, and then Black Ops 2 and Common America have been crowdfunded. There had to have been somebody in the industry when you're like, well, who's doing crowdfunding right? Who do we want to market, or do our marketing after? Who do we want to emulate or whatever? And I imagine you had to reach out to them at some point.
Well, so I know that before we did crowdfunding, we published a satirical comedy book called Thump: The First 100 Days. And we published that direct market, but we worked with Brett Smith. And Brett Smith was the editor, and he's a talented colorist. I believe he used to color the Avengers for Marvel, so he's actually he's very good. But he's also a very good editor. He has a lot of connections. He has a lot of industry experience. And so Brett gave us a lot of guidance. And we published direct market with Thump: The First 100 Days, and then we published direct market with Black Ops Volume 1, which was originally a 2-issue miniseries that we published through Antarctic Press. But then after that, we went to crowdfunding, and that was a lot of play it by ear. You learn by doing, you learn by practice, you figure out the things that you could have done better, things you could have done more efficiently. And for a lot of our crowdfunding stuff, we had examples that were online. And now I'm not going to name names because I'm going to be polite, but most of what we did when we looked at other crowdfunds is that we looked at what we didn't like about them, or what we felt they were doing wrong, or they were doing inefficiently, and we didn't make the same mistakes that they did. So we were looking at other crowdfunds, less for examples of what to do and more for examples of what not to do.
But
and
you
I think
did
that
reach
helped us
out to
succeed.
Brett Smith, and he
And
was a mentor of sorts to you guys.
He was very, yes, he was a great fount of wisdom in getting us started before we even began using the crowdfund model. And one of the things that we learned with the crowdfund models, we don't even call it crowdfunding or crowdsourcing because the book's already done before we even put it up on Kickstarter, Indiegogo. We call it the pre-order model because that's exactly what you're doing. The book's ready to go. You're just pre-ordering it, and then we send it to you 2 weeks after it ends. And that was another thing that we learned is that we're using the crowdsourced platform, but we're treating it like a direct market platform. And we learned that working with Brett Smith prior to that with Thump the First 100 Days and such. But that's stuff that we learned from meeting people who've already done these things and worked in these industries before us.
Absolutely, and I can attest myself. I've had Brett on the channel a few times. We've talked. He's a great dude. If you could get Brett Smith as a mentor of sorts, you're going to be very happy. He's going to give you exceptionally direct feedback. He's going to tell you when you're doing good. He's going to tell you when you're doing bad. He's going to tell you how you can improve, and he's going to give you advice, from his experience. And that's exactly what you're looking for out of a mentor, in my opinion.
Clinton Cash, New York Times bestseller. He worked on that, so yeah, he's got a lot of successful experience.
Well, he didn't only work on that. He was essentially the producer of the book. He managed the entire thing. Yeah,
and he did that before we did Thump. So that's all the experience he gave us when we started Thump. So yeah, he's a huge amount of knowledge.
Absolutely. So here's another thing we've been talking about it being a mentor. Stuff's really important. This is obviously the kind of the stage of my career I was in the military when I ended up. I was a senior NCO. Although I did have my own mentors as a senior NCO that were kind of maybe grooming you for further promotions, but. Many see mentoring as a one-way street. The more experienced person takes the rookie under their wing, with the only reward perhaps being the satisfaction of watching their growth. In actuality, mentoring offers many growth benefits outside of simply feeling good about what somebody saw. Like we talked about with Aaron Sparrow earlier, you get someone that you can connect with. Even if you're in the mentor role, you still have a personal connection, and that's always nice. And you're always going to be looking for someone that can ask the right questions, whose experience lines up with your experience actually lines up with their goals. If somebody's coming up and they're like, well, I really want to write, I don't know, a horror comic for DC. Aaron Sparrow might have to tell you, I'm not the right guy to be your mentor because I've never actually done that. But if you want to write Disney comics, I'm a good mentor because I have all those connections. I've had that experience. So you're going to be looking for people that are looking for that kind of advice that lines up with what you can actually provide. Definitely someone you can communicate with and that has a good work ethic. I'm sure, Aaron, in your experience, you've had people come in, maybe you worked with them, and they wanted to continue working with you or maybe bouncing ideas. But when you worked with them, they didn't work very hard or your communication just wasn't very good. And you're like, I don't know that this is the person I want to keep in contact with for forever, talking about the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always someone to give people a second chance because you never know what. I mean, sometimes you do. Sometimes you get to really know your artists and your colorists and your letterers, and you kind of know what's going on in their lives. If they're going through any particular struggles or whatnot. But some people keep that private. So I always try to keep in mind that everybody's fighting a war that you probably know nothing about, and give people the benefit of the doubt and give them second chances. But yeah, you have to be reliable. If I ask you to do something, you have to be able to turn it around. You have to be able to give me a solid answer on things. And you can't just be honest. Don't take on something that you can't finish because you're afraid to say no. Tell me that you can't finish it. I will respect that far more than if you tell me you will do it and then you let me down.
So thinking about that one, Mark, I'm sure there are people who have reached out to you and Tim for advice on crowdfunding.
I'm one of them.
Aaron Sparrow, have you ever noticed they just have all the wrong questions? Or the questions that they're asking, you're like, why are you coming to me for this? This is our model. You're asking us for something that's completely different that other people do.
Well, here's I will say that this is the more irritating thing, when something to avoid doing, as just everyone out there, when you approach someone to ask them for advice and you're approaching them sincerely. Now, the first thing you need to do is you need to approach them sincerely with the intent of internalizing the feedback that they're going to give you and considering making changes based on that feedback. If you're going to ask for someone to give you their time and their advice, but you're doing it without the intention of even considering changing your method, changing your approach, or actually internalizing the advice that they're giving you, then you're just wasting their time. And frequently in the past, a couple years ago, people would come to me in DMs on Twitter, and they would ask me for advice on writing. And there'd be the very basic things like, how do I format a script? How do I, plot out a story arc? Things like that. And I would take a long time to type up, this is what I do. And I would type these very long paragraphs, explain to them. I would send them screenshots of my scripts and of my plotting, my page breakdowns, my notes, and I'd send them all that material. And then they would reply like, yeah, that doesn't work for me. Thanks anyway. And like, wow, I just spent, an hour or more giving you all this material advice and writing all this stuff down for you just for you to blow me off and say, yeah, that's not going to work for me. Thanks anyway. And while if it doesn't work for you, that's fine. I understand. But that was a time sink on my part where you just blew it off in 5 seconds.
Yeah, you just invested in somebody else and they didn't appreciate it.
So what's one of the things where originally I switched over to doing these videos on the Bunderdome, my comic script tips unscripted, which was what it was called. It was like a 10-part series I did on Bunderdome, where I just it's a lot like what we're doing right now, where just in each episode I went over the basics of formatting a script or plotting your story arcs, developing your characters, developing character dynamics, things like that, just the basics, so that when people would come to me in DMs and ask me these basic questions, I would just point to those videos so I wouldn't have to do those time sinks again. But that is something that is, and it isn't just writing. Have you ever, had someone who comes to you and like, wow, you've lost a lot of weight. How did you do it? And like, oh, well, it was a combination of diet, exercise, and discipline. And they go, oh, that's not going to work for me. And then, they stay fat forever. It's like they're not actually looking for an answer. They're either looking for like the magic wand, the magic spell that will just make them skinny like overnight, or that'll just make them a Brian Michael Bendis superstar writer overnight, or they're just, it's not what they want to hear. They're looking for some sort of confirmation bias, and that's just wasting your time. So don't be that guy, everyone out there. If you are looking for a mentor or are looking for someone to give you advice, ask them questions sincerely with the intention of thinking about what you've learned or heard.
Also, you have to remember people's temperaments. Doc has a specific personality. If you're somebody that cannot take criticism or takes everything personally, you would never want him to be your mentor. Because if you asked him a question, he's going to be brutally honest with you. Not everybody is willing to take that. Aaron Sparrow, on the other hand, he's more of a teddy bear. He's good. He's more of a Papa Bear. You know what I mean? He's going to give you that feedback, but he's going to wrap it up and make it as nice as possible so you don't feel bad about yourself. Not everybody, just because somebody is where you want to be doesn't mean you're ready to hear things the way that they see them. You know what I mean, Aaron?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I am going to try to give you the feedback. It's going to be direct, but it's going to be I'm going to try to make sure that you understand that this feedback is brutally honest, but the reason it's brutally honest is because I'm trying to get you somewhere. I'm trying to break down maybe some bad habits that you've got in your script writing and rebuild you with good habits. It's a lot like the military. You get people in there and you kind of have to break them down before you can build them back up as a unit. And that's kind of what an editor should be doing, is they should be kind of breaking you down and helping you to understand the best way to tell your story, the best way to communicate it to your artist, and the best way to work with your peers, who because you are going to have to work with the colorist and the letterer. A lot of times you're not going to have any interaction with them, but sometimes if you work for an editor like me, I'm going to send you their pages when they turn them in, so that if you notice that something's wrong that I've missed because you're close to the script and you're like, oh wait, no, this guy needs to not be kind of shadowed out because he's going to be important in a minute, and that's or he's going to be important in a later issue, so I need more focus on him. You're going to know that better than me because maybe I haven't seen your next script yet. I don't know that background character becomes important. So it's a lot of communication and a lot of back and forth. And, we're going to try to set you up to be the most successful person that you can in that regard. And sometimes that's going to come with harsh criticism. So you have to be ready to listen to it. Sometimes it won't be right, and you can take it into account, but then you can dismiss it. but you should be able to listen to it and to consider it.
Absolutely. So we've kind of gone over the benefits of being a mentor, how to go and find a mentor. If you want looking for a mentee, the things that you should keep in consideration, make sure that you're a good match and you're not wasting your time like Mark there was talking about. Now let's talk about the state of mentorship in the comics. And I'm going to be honest, after talking to you initially and you both saying, I'm not a mentor, this makes me think that it's probably not very good because you didn't even realize a lot of your relationships or mentor-mentee relationships. There's no formal program really in comic books. I saw there's one in Comic Pro for retailers. I've also seen there's a bit of trying to establish like a formal mentorship program amongst comic creators. It didn't look like that was a very active site. But in the military, in the Air Force, there's no official program, but there was guidance on mentorship. So once you become a leader, an NCO, a senior NCO, you should be reading up on the guidance to see what's expected of you as a mentor. I know in the Navy, they had an official program. It had a little manual and everything, and they would assign people mentors, and you would have to go and have lunch like once a week and stuff like this. There certainly is mentorship in comic books, Mark, as we were talking about earlier. Michael Bendis is very influential due to his mentorship arrangements. Scott Snyder is very influential because he is a mentor to a lot of creators like a James Tynion, Joshua Williamson. I know there's others like a Vita Ayala. They've all gone through his courses. Another name we mentioned earlier was Warren Ellis. I guess that didn't work out for him. What are your thoughts on the state of mentorship in comics? Do you think it's important? Do you think there should be more of it?
So I've never taken one of those courses. I've never gone specifically to lectures. There's a lot of like Zoom classes you can take. I've never done those. I'm the kind of person I like to learn through experience, both doing the right way and the wrong way. I feel like that's how I've grown the most. But also, if you take one of those courses, especially from a celebrity writer, because generally if someone's going to have a course like that, they're going to be a pretty famous writer. And I tend to take their advice with a grain of salt because a lot of it's very egocentric. They're going to tell you how to write their way, and their way must be the right way because they're millionaires, right? And that may work if you're trying to get into, Hollywood, the Hollywood studio system, and then everybody wants you to write the script that's the same. That they want you to write like James Gunn or Joss Whedon or something. So if that's all you care about doing is being a pastiche of like James Gunn or Joss Whedon, so you take one of their courses to learn how to write like them, that's fine. But if you want the fundamentals to grow it and develop your own voice, you're probably not going to learn it from a lecture from a celebrity writer. So that's kind of my attitude on those. I mean, I've had a friend of ours who went to some Neil Gaiman lectures, and he just came back, all starry-eyed, like, oh, and he was just like quoting Neil Gaiman and such. And then he started writing, and the stuff he was writing was like Neil Gaiman fan fiction. He was writing like Neil Gaiman because that's how he learned. I think some of the best things you can do and this comes more from casual conversation, one-on-one with other writers, is. So here's my experience that I can say, an anecdote. And you can watch it in real time. Over on the Bunderdome, we had Roland Mann from Malibu Comics on. I think it was the second time he was on the Bunderdome with us, and we were discussing writing. And the two of us, Roland and I, we have very different approaches to formatting scripts. I write my comic scripts. I break it down each page. I break down the panels, what happens with the panels. I include the dialogue, etc. And his style is more of a it's a meatier version of the Marvel method, where he'll say what happens on the page, and he'll give a unique description of the action and a description of the dialogue, but he'll leave it up to the artist to do however many panels they want to break down that action the way they want, and then he'll go in and he'll modify his dialogue, and he'll kind of caption his dialogue based on what's happening in the art. It's closer to the Marvel method than the way I write. And he shared his screen and he showed me his scripts and how he did it. And prior to that, I always kind of had a negative view of the Marvel method as a writer. I felt like as a writer, you're not doing enough work yourself if you do it that way. But then I saw his scripts, his formatting, and it was very different from my perception of the Marvel method. And then he talked about his experiences working with writers and how they enjoy working with him as the artist, enjoy working with him as the writer, using that method and the benefits of it. And so I learned, that, okay, my way isn't always the best way. There are other writers who have other formatting techniques that they collaborate with their artists on, and those create great comics as well. There's more than one way to do things, and you shouldn't have the ego to think that your way must be the one and only way to do things. And I got that from having a wonderful conversation with Roland. And that's something you don't get when you're just sitting there being lectured at on a Zoom meeting with Neil Gaiman.
Absolutely. That's what mentorship is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, person to person, informal, to where, there's the mentee looking up and asking questions and trying to learn, learn about where they want to be and get advice on how to get there. Aaron, as somebody that was actually in a comic book publisher, you worked for Boom, you worked for Tokyo Pop, you were an editor for a lot of these people. You've become a mentor over time. What are your thoughts on the state of mentorship in comics? It does feel like there are some things that are broken because of the amount of cronyism and nepotism within the comic book industry, to where maybe mentorship itself even gets warped to a degree.
Yeah, I think that you need to be really careful within the comic book industry. One thing that we've found out over recent years is that the comic book industry is like any other industry. The people in it are human beings, and they have their flaws and they have agendas. And so, you might come up against a mentor who isn't really interested in your work, but is more interested in, getting you into the bedroom. That's certainly been a problem with, with what we've seen with the way that people that Warren Ellis mentored, the way that they've perceived things, and maybe the way that things were. I can't really speak to that because I wasn't there, but there's a lot of stories about that in the industry where people will feign interest because they have a personal interest in you. So you need to try to find people who are genuine, people who are really interested in your talent. You need to be discerning when seeking out mentorships or establishing relationships.
Absolutely. You definitely want to protect yourself. And like I said, there needs to be a connection there, and you definitely need to sniff out the creeps, because there are a lot of creeps in not only in comics, but everywhere in life. But it feels like there's more of a problem within comics because of
it's really hard to believe that there's a casting couch in the comic book industry. You'd think it would be so low tier, like who would denigrate themselves and dishonor themselves just to write or draw a comic for Marvel or DC or Image, that they would sell their bodies like that. But it's in every industry, including comics, large and small. It's very sad.
This is what Dominic Powell, who's going to college to be a comic book creator. I had that experience with Brian Michael Bendis and David F. Walker. I imagine he's talking about going through maybe some of their online tutorials or guidance sessions. Not that good, which is why I took their lessons with a grain of salt. I found you three and others do a better job of them. Well, I appreciate that. And he probably looks at Aaron and Mark as mentors of some type. And Dion and I have actually talked in the past. So maybe he even looks up to me as some type of mentor. I do appreciate that. Dion's a really good guy. And that's something that's another thing that's important, Aaron, is you guys you weren't even thinking, well, I'm a mentor because I've established these long-term relationships with people that were working under me, and they continue to come back to me for advice on how to do things and to help keep them encouraged. You might not even realize you're a mentor, and that kind of, as a mentor, you gotta be a good guy. Let's put it that way. You don't want to be the mentor that gets drunk and makes a complete fool of himself.
No, you want to be someone who is in control and who understands the power dynamic that you have when you have somebody that looks up to you and respects that power dynamic and doesn't want to muddy those waters. I think that unfortunately, people are human. Attraction exists, and maybe you set out with maybe some of these people set out with the best intentions. They do think that you're talented, but the part of being talented is people have an appreciation for that, and that can lead to attraction. So these are all things that you just kind of have to navigate when you're dealing with people, whether they be the opposite or the preferred sex.
Absolutely, because you might not realize this, Aaron. When you go to a Comic-Con, you've likely been talked up by somebody that you've made an impact on. And they're like, oh, you're going to see Aaron Sparrow. This guy is great. He's done this and this and this. That person goes and sees you in person, live and in person, and you make a fool of yourself. you've also just made a fool of that other person. So you have to hold yourself to a higher standard and regard when you're a leader in many places because of the mentorship factors like that. I know, Mark, you're not buying into that. You're still going to be a fool no matter where you are, right?
Oh yeah, I can't help it. That's just who I am.
So I think we've had a very good conversation about the state of mentorship. I think we've got a lot of examples out here. Doesn't look like we got any viewer questions to get into. If you have them, put them in there now. It doesn't have to be just about mentorship. It can just be about comic book writing. Maybe you have a question about a comic book that came out this week. But I do appreciate it. I did think it was slightly amusing that Aaron didn't consider himself a mentor where he clearly is, and Mark didn't consider himself a mentor where he clearly is, but they just don't see themselves that way because I guess people have this weird idea that mentorship is a formal program, but is completely informal, and it's a lot about relationships and helping people succeed. And Mark, you certainly want to do that. I'm sorry, Aaron. I meant to point it to you.
No, that's okay. I was going to say I try to stay humble, and there have been cases in my life where people have come to me and they said like, "Hey, you said this thing, and it really like hurts people's feelings." And I'm like, "What? Why?" It was just an opinion, and they're like, "Well, people see you as their peer," and it takes me like that. I was taken aback by that because I don't really think of myself that way. I just think of myself as, "Hey, I'm just this guy, and this is my opinion, and your mileage may vary." But yeah, I guess it can come with a certain amount of weight. So I had to kind of factor that into my thinking and understand that there was that responsibility. See, and then Wes had to correct me and say, no, you are mentoring people. I'm thinking like, no, Wes, I've never had an understudy. I've never had somebody coming over 3 times a week and me like imparting my wisdom to them. I'm not a mentor. And he had to go, no, you're not thinking of this the right way. And if I would have been thinking clearly, I would have, it's like I didn't have Tad Stones inviting me over to his house 3 days a week to learn from his knowledge. But every time that we got together, every time that we had dinner, every time that we discussed story or I ran things by him, he would give me feedback and he would give me advice and he would give me ideas. So, I should have been thinking of it in that vein.
Absolutely. And believe it or not, Aaron, there's somebody out there, probably more than one, that their dream in life is to write Darkwing Duck as well as you did.
I hope that they do.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you want to help them do that.
Yeah, I'd love to help them, and eventually, at some point, if when I decide that my time with Darkwing is done, I want that to be picked up by, I want to leave it in a state that someone else can pick it up and run with it and tell amazing stories.
Yeah, another thing that I like about Mark and Tim as a creative pair, I don't think they see themselves as leaders in the industry or within crowdfunding or everything, but I can guarantee you there are more than 5 or 6 people out there that look up to Mark and Tim, what they've been able to accomplish in comic book crowdfunding, building up their own platform, generating the sales, growing an audience without YouTube and all the other things that you're told that you have to do it. And people are absolutely looking up to you guys and looking to you for guidance and mentorship. And I like the way you're handling yourselves. But believe me, Mark, people look up to you, and you are a mentor to a lot of people. You just don't even realize.
Oh, I feel so sorry for them. We talked about making bad life choices earlier, and that's the worst one.
DM Tim, leave Mark alone.
I will say something that, about you and Tim that I really respect is that you have built your platform and you have sold your comic book and you have delivered your comic book. You've done everything very professionally, and you've done it without having to have a YouTube channel where you just tear other people down and where you just go and you start fights and cause controversy with other creators. You guys don't need to do all that. And you guys have proven it. You guys have proven that you sit down and you work hard and you put out a good product and you put it out on time and you give people what they paid for and you don't make them wait forever for it. You don't need all that manufactured drama, to get people interested. People are interested in your product. They're not interested in your cult of personality. And I think that's highly commendable because, so many people go the other way and they have to, stir up all this huge controversy in order to keep the spotlight on them. And you guys have proven that you don't have to do that. You just have to do solid work. So my hat's off to you.
And I have grown fond of you as well.
And Mark and Tim, they don't advertise it, but they do actually encourage and help a lot of people behind the scenes. But they don't want the credit for the work they put in there. But I know what you guys did. This is what Dion has to say. What are the best friends of comics people could look for inspiration if they want to be writers? I don't know. What made you want to be a writer, Aaron?
Oh man, I was really big into Larry Hama's G.I. Joe. What I liked about it was that it wasn't a power fantasy. I didn't realize it at the time, most comics are kind of a power fantasy. The idea of what if you had this amazing power. And years later, I saw Larry Hama in an interview describe G.I. Joe as a loyalty fantasy. And I really loved that. So I think that's why I connected with that run so much, because loyalty is very important to me in my life. I try to give loyalty and I expect it in return. I'm not always going to be right. I'm not always going to be, making the best decision, but, I expect that people, stand by me if I've stood by them. So, and help to guide me in those times. So loyalty is very important to me, and that run was huge. Not only is it because of that reason, but because it's a very well written run with a lot of very diverse and interesting characters and personalities mixing together in a really natural way. Those early G.I. Joe issues are fantastic. I'm also a huge fan of Mark Gruenwald's Captain America run. There were some politically themed stories, but there were also some great adventure stories, and that's the balance that comics used to have. When people say, well, comics have always been political. Yeah, there's always been politics in comics, but it hasn't always been beaten into you over and over, issue after issue, ad nauseum. For every X-Men story that was about, prejudice against mutants and, them fighting to save a world that hates and fears them, there were also space adventures that had nothing to do with, them being mutants. It was just they were superheroes, and, they got taken by the Shi'ar, and there was this, this huge thing in space that they had to deal with. So those are the kind of runs that I think to look for. I think you look at Claremont's X-Men, James Robinson's Starman. These are all runs that Captain America under Mark Gruenwald, and then later Mark Waid and Ron Garney, their first run especially, was a lot of fun. No matter what you think of what Mark Waid has done to his legacy at this point, he has done really solid work. So I think there's a lot of good things out there to draw inspiration from, and we could do a whole stream on that probably.
Absolutely. What was your inspiration, Mark, real quick?
Well, so the first comics that I ever read were obviously superhero comics, particularly X-Men. But the first comic I read that was outside of that sphere of superhero comics that kind of, taught me that there was so much more and there was interesting things that you can do. It was Sam Keith's and Bill Messner-Loeb's The Max. I remember picking up that comic, and I was like, it had the trappings of a superhero comic, which is why I initially picked it up, but it's not a superhero comic. It's just a very strange psychological drama with these characters, and the characters are so well fleshed out and so interesting. It ceased to matter to me that after the first issue, it's not a superhero versus supervillain book. It's just a psychological drama. And I was so wrapped up in these characters and who they were and what was happening to them that there didn't even need to sometimes even really be a lot of action, or at least, what I considered action in comics in the book, because the characters, who they were so fleshed out and so realistic, but also that it was a book where it could just switch its gears whenever it wanted. You would get to like issue 5, where they had David Feast, the creator of Cow and Chicken, do a guest issue, and it's just this really wacky, surreal dream comedy. And like, you can just do that. You can just take your book and you can change the genre and you can just have fun with it, and it can be a completely freewheeling kind of story. That maybe one issue is an action story where he's fighting a villain from Savage Dragon, and the next issue is just this crazy madcap surreal comedy. It can be whatever you want and whatever the writer wants it to be. And like, wow, this looks like these guys are having a lot of fun, and I really want to do that. And that was a big inspiring story for me.
That's awesome. Andrew Wyatt asks, where can I find those examples of script writing again? If you go in, the first lesson, I think, is brainstorming. Second lesson is outlining. The third lesson is scripting. There are examples or links to examples for scripting in there, and we also talk about it within that first lesson, or the third lesson as well, the scripting one. You'll find it in the comic book writing playlist on the channel. El Keblo C, do you guys have any tips on writing a superhero story with more of a horror element? I'm going to throw this to Mark because you are the horror guy. I do not mean any offense, Aaron.
The best examples of telling horror stories through the lens of superhero comics is going to be 1970s, almost anything, because that's when horror comics were having a huge resurgence. The Comics Code Authority had neutered horror comics in the 50s, but through just time and pushing the boundaries and bending the rules over 20 years. By the 1970s, Marvel and DC were kind of able to do horror comics again, and there's a big resurgence, but they were doing them through the lens of superhero comics. That's how they were getting away with it.
Swamp Thing, good example.
Swamp Thing by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson, and later on Alan Moore and Rick Veitch. That's a great one. Or Man-Thing is another awesome one. But Tomb of Dracula, that's very much a superhero take on a horror book. Ghost Rider, the most superhero-esque horror comic that I can think of. That's a fantastic run. The Monster of Frankenstein, Werewolf by Night. They're all fantastic comics, and they're all from the 1970s. Or you can pick up Roy Thomas's Marvel Conan the Barbarian comic, and that's got a lot of it's sword and sorcery, but it's got a lot of monsters because they're adapting Robert E. Howard short stories, and he wrote a lot of horror stuff. The best superhero-esque comics come from the 1970s, and they're all in reprint right now. I really recommend just delving into those, and you'll see how it's done.
Yeah, and Dion's got some examples in the comment section. This is going to be the last question because I got something else I have to do. I apologize. This one's for Aaron from Darth Bobcat. Is there ever a good time to deconstruct an iconic character a la The Last Jedi?
Everything gets deconstructed so often now. I mean, that is the default, that I don't think that it's effective. I think it's something that needs to die for a time. And then can later have a resurgence 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It's just become the norm, and unfortunately it's tired, and there's nothing new to be said with deconstructing characters all of The Last Jedi. There's nothing there that's satisfying for the reader or for the viewer. I don't think
the trope's been killed at this point.
We've all seen it so many times that there's just nothing new under the sun. So I would say to probably avoid that, so that what you're doing seems fresh and original. Because if you just tell a story now where you've just got strong characters performing heroic deeds, that's going to seem fresh and interesting. It's kind of, if you think back to the 70s when everyone was deconstructing everything in film and everything was morose and sad, and a lot of that spun out of Americans' feelings after the Vietnam War, and filmmakers kind of taking that to heart. They were producing these really morose and somber films. Some great movies came out of it, but that was all that was available. And then a movie called Star Wars came out that was hopeful and that was, something, that people hadn't seen before, and became such a huge worldwide phenomenon. And the reason is because Lucas could have made a depressing space movie and, to tie into the times where, everything's downtrodden, everything's awful. But instead, he looked to the classic stories because they weren't being told then. And he, went and created his own mythology, and it became this huge worldwide phenomenon that everybody just absolutely adores, until recently. So, there you go. Try to do something different. And right now, deconstruction is all the rage, so don't do that.
Dion says, Mark is Johnny to Aaron's Daniel LaRusso. And that is how we're going to leave this one. I agree. Go for the knee. Go for the knee, Johnny.
Leave the leg.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun, talking about mentorship. We'll get back into comic book writing. I think we're going to talk about action scenes and transitions next week. So we'll get more into the nuts and bolts of actually creating your comic. We talked about networking. Now we've done mentorship, and we'll probably do another Ask Us Anything again, since so many people enjoyed that one. Sometimes soon. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Thank you, Wes, and thank you to everybody who showed up.